Shannon Waller here, and welcome to this episode of the Team Success Podcast. Today, what I want to do is talk about a distinction between strategic and tactical. And I had a real insight into this when I was coaching one of my very favorite teams a few weeks ago. As I was working with them, their leadership team, over the course of the day, what happened was we went from strategic to tactical conversation, then back to strategic, and then back to tactical. And it was really interesting because I really had to have my wits about me as we had this conversation. But at the end of the day, they went around and said, wow, this was one of the best days we've ever had together as a leadership team. So that was pretty great. And it got me thinking because we would dive in sometimes, do deep dives into specific actions that they were going to do with particular vendors and particular opportunities and particular clients and particular services that they offer. And my job as a strategic coach was to take a step back and say, okay, guys, this is great. But as we talk about this one, what are your success criteria for not only this instance, but other ones like it, for other opportunities, for other initiatives that you're going to do? How are you going to make decisions ongoingly? And then we would come up with these success criteria. So my job was to pull out the strategy from all of the tactics. And it got me thinking that this would be fabulous to talk about on the Team Success Podcast because it is a dynamic, it's a flow that a lot of people experience, but they don't quite know to do what when. And it's something that certainly as you running your company, heading up your teams, really want to pay attention to is that balance between strategic and tactical. So just to give you a few definitions, strategic, and there's lots of different places where you can look for this, really talks about long-term overall vision. What do you want to accomplish? It's really the what. Then tactics are about the how and the who. So who's going to be involved in it? When does it need to happen? What tools are we going to employ? What specific little initiatives can we do to get that result? And again, in my experience, you need both. If I see a company that's all strategy, no tactics, nice conversation, nothing happens. And if I see a company that's all tactical, no strategic, they could be on a long march in the wrong direction. And I've seen it happen. So again, having that balance, I think it's what Dr. Barry Johnson would call a polarity to manage as opposed to a problem to solve. Sometimes you can be too tactical and sometimes you can be too strategic, but it's really keeping that balance, which we managed to do in my team coaching session over the course of that day. But I wanted to share with you a couple of things that can help you. I think most of us tend to default to tactical. What are we going to do this week? How are we going to increase sales? What marketing initiative do we need to make happen? What email can we send out? How many calls get made? Those are the kind of things, certainly in some of our meetings, that we talk about here at Strategic Coach. And yet, you really need to step back and say, how are we growing? What's our new capability level? Are we still going in the same direction? Do we need to retool a little bit? If something's not working, probably a good time to revisit that. And one of the things I really love about Strategic Coach tools, so if you're in the coach program, these will be familiar to you. If not, I invite you to check us out and find out more about us. Things like the strategy circle, figuring out your goal, result, all of the obstacles in the way of that result, and then finally what are the strategies for overcoming them and transforming those obstacles. The experience transformer, how is it that you can take a circumstance, figure out what about it worked, what didn't, knowing what we know now, what would we do differently next time, and then what's our new course of action. These are tools that take you out of the moment, out of that short-term hyper-focus that we have sometime, and into, okay, how are we going to look at this situation? How can we do things in a new and improved fashion next time? And there's lots of other tools like that at Coach. So I realized one of the things I really like is just how much I've benefited from the experience of strategic thinking and how I love sharing that with my clients. To me, it is such fun because they're in the minutia of their business. That's what they do. That's their job. And my job as their coach is to help them see the method to the madness, stand back and take the overall approach. When we were preparing for this podcast, one of the conversation topics that came up was how do you build a really great team? Okay, so that's really a strategy. Build a great team. In Strategic Coach world, we talk about creating a unique ability team, what have you. My personal favorite is to have a team with an entrepreneurial attitude, Well, how do you go about doing that? So that's the strategy. The tactics are the specifics. So you've heard me probably, if you've been listening to the podcast series, talk about Kolbe as a fabulous psychometric profile that helps analyze people's talents and strengths and how they naturally problem solve. It's available at kolbe.com. Do the Kolbe A profile. StrengthsFinder is a fabulous way to get really a picture of people's top 5 strengths. Love that. My favorite book for referencing that from Gallup is Strengths-Based Leadership, because it not only gives you your 5 strengths, it also tells you what different themes they fall into. So whether or not you have relationship building strengths or strategic thinking strengths or influencing strengths or executing strengths. And of course, it's lovely to know your own. It's also extraordinarily powerful and a real multiplier if you also know your team's strengths. And that's a specific tactic for how you can build a really strong team. What are your communication tactics? Do you close open files? Do you have regular huddles? Do you have regular communication meetings? Those are ways where you can make sure you're having the open, transparent conversations that really build trust so everyone knows what's going on. So since our formula here, our mission here is really about team success, I wanted to make sure that you had that distinction between strategic and tactical, and that you take a look at your meetings, your conversations, and really say, okay, are they all tactical? Are they all strategic? Could I switch that balance a little bit? I know for me, I tend to be much better at strategic. Tactics, not so much. That's really not my area of expertise. However, I am blessed and incredibly fortunate to work with people who are fabulous at tactics. And what I can add to them is sometimes a step back to say, okay, what's the strategy? How can we improve that? Is there a tool that we can analyze the situation with so we can make it even better next time? So again, each of us will have our own sort of side that we sit on, where our particular strengths lay. Some of you may be perfectly balanced in both and just easily manage between the two. More power to you. But it really is having that awareness. So next time you go into a meeting, just listen to the conversation. Is this a tactical meeting? Does it need some strategy? If you're in a strategic meeting, does it get concrete and practical enough so that people actually know what they need to do when they leave? Working with a lot of entrepreneurs, many of whom tend to not be very detail focused, they're fabulous at strategy, not so great at implementation, not so great at the specific tactics, and they wonder why their team doesn't kick in sometimes. The real balance is to make sure that your team, especially, if not your clients, really know exactly what they need to do next. That's the tactic that's tied to the strategy that you've been talking about. So again, I just wanted to share my insight about this because I think it's something that I know I can get better at. And when I'm looking at things through this lens, I see things a little bit differently. I make sure the scales are balanced so that we have an equal balance between a fabulous strategy that's going to get us where we want to go in terms of the long term, and then we have very powerful, concrete, practical tactics that help move us towards that goal. So I hope this conversation has been of interest to you. It's definitely short and sweet. This is not something that needs a ton more conversation, but I want to share my insights and hope they're equally as useful for you. Thanks very much for listening. And as always, here's to your team's success. Hi, Shannon here, and thank you very much for listening. If you like what you heard today, please take a moment to rate the Team Success podcast on iTunes. And we'd love it if you'd share the podcast with anyone else who could benefit. If you're interested in learning more about the Strategic Coach program for entrepreneurs, visit us at strategiccoach.com or the Strategic Coach channel on YouTube. For free downloads and more team success strategies, visit teamsuccesshandbook.com.